again with Carol Simon. It's March 19th, 2019. We're in her home in Portal. And where I like to start always, Carol, is when did you first come to Portal and how did you end up coming here?
In 1964, I was 17 years old, and I was in high school in Southern California. And the year before, I had had a wonderful biology teacher named Murray Eels. And if Murray Eels decided that you had an interest in biology, he took you under his wing. And that spring, the spring of 1964, he brought a small group of students and teachers to southern Arizona for spring break. And it was March, and I remember it was cold and windy, kind of like it's been. Mm-hmm. And we were mostly based over in the Huachucas. We stayed in a little tiny motel in Huachuca City, and we each had $25 for meals for the week. And so we were mostly traipsing around the Huachucas, Ramsey Canyon, Carr Canyon. But one day, the last day, we came to the Chiricahuas. We drove over to the Chiricahuas, and we visited the Southwestern Research Station. And I can still remember leaving the canyon that day and just turning back and looking at the beautiful rhyolite rocks, the Cathedral Rock, Silver Peak. I can still remember that vividly. That summer, Vince Roth, who was the director at the time, he was in his second year of directing the station, called Murray Eels right before the summer and said, I need some student volunteers here for the summer to help run the station. And so 3 of us from that high school, Azusa High School, came to Portal. And I remember coming on a Greyhound bus. I rode from Southern California to San Simon on a Greyhound bus. I got put out on a dirt street sitting on my suitcase with nobody around, but eventually somebody did come and get me and took me to the station. And that summer, there were 6 volunteers, and we were all in high school, and that's different than how the research station operates today. Today, the volunteers are college students, graduate students, even adults. But then we were 6 high school students, and we ran the station with 3.5 paid employees. There were 3.5 paid employees and 6 high school volunteers. The station was a little scaled back compared to what it is now, because there was no dorm now, and there weren't so many classes. Yeah. I mean, there was no dorm then, yeah, and not so many classes. Yeah. But the volunteers either came from my high school or they came through contacts at the American Museum of Natural History in New York. And of course, the American Museum of Natural History owns the Southwestern Research Station. And so one of the other volunteers, Emily Amidon, was the daughter of a curator in ornithology, Dean Amidon. And one of the volunteers was named Kip Witter, and he is Dean Witter III. And his father was a trustee at the museum. So those were the pathways at that time to the research station. So here I am at the Southwestern Research Station. I had really no knowledge of either how science was done or the academic life. I came from families of immigrants. I mean, my father's family was Hungarian, my mother's family Czechoslovakian, and I just didn't have those kinds of experiences at all. So it was a life-changing experience to be there at the research station for that summer. And then for the rest of my life, I kept coming back in various capacities.
Before you move on, I'd like to know more about what you did for your internship that year.
The role of a volunteer or intern at the Southwestern Research Station was similar then to what it is now. You're expected to work 4 hours a day for 6 days, so about 24 hours a week, doing things like making beds and cleaning cabins and helping in the kitchen and just whatever needs to be done, cutting the grass, cleaning the swimming pool, whatever needs to be done at the research station. And then the other 4 hours, you're really expected to do something scientific. So that could be going out into the field with different scientists. It could be working on a project of your own. So for example, today, if a graduate student comes as a volunteer, what that student is trying to do is kind of offset the costs of being at the station, and they would be working on their own project. But at age 17, I didn't exactly have my own project, you know. So I did several things. I went out into the field with a variety of scientists, and I worked more intensively with one group of scientists. And what's interesting, talking about how a summer like that can change your life, one of the scientists that I went out with periodically into the field was Howard Topoff, who is my husband. And he was there as a first-year graduate student working on army ants. There was a very, very famous geneticist there at the time, population geneticist, named Theodosis Dobzhansky, who was a legendary evolutionary biologist and geneticist. And
what was he doing?
He was looking at various Drosophila, little tiny flies, and I can't really remember the details of his project at this point. But you know, I was out in the field with him. Then the group that I spent the most time with, these were scientists from the University of California at Riverside, and they were working on the spadefoot toads that are in the area, on desert physiology of these spadefoot toads. And of course, most of us that live here recognize the spadefoot toads for just having this wonderful explosive breeding, where in the spring, in the monsoon, when the first rains come and there are ponds that form, all these toads come together and they are so loud you literally have to hold your ears because they are all coming to the ponds to breed at once, and they're really a lot of fun. Anyhow, this group from UC Riverside, which was headed by Rudy Reval, it sort of took me in, and I helped out in the lab, and I went out in the field with them when my schedule permitted. And about, let's see, that was 1964. By 1970, Rudy Reval was my PhD advisor. So that summer, not only did I meet my husband, but I met the person that would become my PhD advisor.
That's incredible.
Yeah. And over the years, I continued to return to the Southwestern Research Station. I did my PhD thesis there. In between, a lot of other things happened. The second summer I was at the station, I was there, they hired me to be the assistant cook, which is a little bit of a joke because I don't really cook that much or that well. But it was the kind of job where you were in the kitchen with the cook, chopping things up. And
you were making some money now.
$25 a week.
Ah.
Yeah. Remember, this is now 1965. And room and board, yeah. And being at the research station,
Yeah.
and you know, getting to still experience all of that. Yeah, right. Which made it all more than worthwhile, obviously.
Yeah.
Then another couple of summers when I was an undergraduate, I came back with various professors and helped them for a couple of weeks at the station with their projects. And by the way, because of that experience that I had with this group of biologists from the University of California, Riverside, I attended the University of California, Riverside. I chose that as my college, my undergraduate college. And then I went elsewhere for a master's degree and came back to UC Riverside for the PhD. Yeah, yeah. It was a life-altering experience. In addition to showing me firsthand how science is done, And I had always wanted to be a scientist from the time I was, I think, in second grade, but I didn't know what kind. And so when I had biology in high school, then I realized, okay, I want to be a biologist. But when I had the experience at the research station, then I realized I wanted to be a field biologist. Yeah. The other way that my experiences at the research station changed my life is today I'm very much an outdoors person. There's nothing I like better than hiking, really. And I just enjoy being outside in nature. And as a child, I didn't have that experience at all. You know, as I said, my family, they were immigrants, and that just wasn't part of their culture at all. So I came here and to the research station, and Vince Roth was really great at getting the volunteers out. We went all over the Chiricahuas and other local mountain ranges also. You know, every week we were out, or several times a week, we were out here and there. You know, we would do things like, we would do the dishes at the station, and we'd get in the back of Vince's truck, and we'd drive up to the top of the Chiricahuas, hike up to Centella Ridge in the moonlight, sleep on the ground. We didn't have tents. We had sleeping bags. We didn't have any tents. It never rained on us that summer, which is remarkable. Get up the next morning before breakfast, run down the trail, drive down the mountain, and be at the station for breakfast. You know, so we had a good time. There was a definite community and other people interested in these things. You know, as a high school student, I wasn't a happy high school student. I really didn't fit in that well into Southern California high schools. You know, I kept toads in my garage. I knew the scientific name of every reptile and amphibian in Southern California, and I was just different. It was hard to find a group that I could fit into. And I was in a very working class high school. Yeah. Are there other people that are still associated from back in your, obviously Howard was, but right. Are there other people? Well, most of my best friends I've met at the research station at one time or another. And you know, they date back to early years at the station. So so you went to graduate, you knew your direction, and did you continue to have, well, you did, because you came back here to do your research. Right, and now I live here. Yeah, yeah. And what was your research on? My research was using lizards, and I am interested in how animals use space. And so I looked at things like how food abundance affects territory size, how animals can partition their space. Even within one species of lizard, you find that bigger lizards are sitting in different places in the habitat. They're choosing different food. There are sex differences, size differences. What time of day are these animals out? I also looked a lot at chemical communication in these animals. You've seen lizards flicking out their tongues like snakes do. Right. They're bringing molecules in, delivering those molecules through the roof of their mouth to an organ called the Jacobson's organ or the vomeronasal organ. And they have this very well-developed sense. It's not traditional taste. It's not taste at all, but it's related to smell, but it's not traditional smell either. It's a different system. And it's well-developed among reptiles. Now, are they using that sense as a way to find food or predator? Yeah, it depends on the species. Yep. You've seen whiptail lizards walking around, just flicking out their tongue constantly. For that group of lizards, the system is really important. And yes, they're finding food and probably detecting information about other members of their species, or if it's a male or their females around, that kind of thing. And yes, there's probably some predator detection that goes on too, and it depends again on the species that you're looking at. There are other species of lizards that hardly ever flick out their tongues. They still do it, but not so much. And for them, the system is less important.
So it's maybe more of just an evolutionary.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. It's certain groups of lizards, and their evolutionary history has resulted in this system being very important, like Gila monsters.
Yeah.
You see, on the rare occasion that we can see Gila monsters here, and they're here, they're flicking out their tongues constantly.
Yeah.
And they're looking for food,
Yeah.
you know. And at least that's one of the things they're doing.
So you get your PhD, what's the next part of your life? What do you do with your PhD?
So I got my PhD in 1973, and I took a postdoc at, of all places, the American Museum of Natural History in New York, who owns the Southwestern Research Station. And getting that position was, you know, frankly, partly due to the contacts that I had at the Southwestern Research Station. So that too shaped the next step. And then I remained on the staff of the American Museum of Natural History as a research associate, even after I was no longer being paid, you know, to be a scientist at the museum. I became a professor at the City College of New York, and we had a joint animal behavior program with City College, Hunter College, and the American Museum of Natural History. So as a research associate at the American Museum of Natural History, and there are many people in this category, you get office space, you get library privileges, you get colleagues, but you're not paid by the museum. You're paid by a university usually. Yeah. So I was paid by the City University of New York.
And at that point, were you still coming out here to the...
Always, yeah, always. Howard and I have both come out to do research. We came out every summer, and sabbaticals for full years.
So from the time you came, if I understand right, came out as a 17-year-old young woman, you came virtually every summer? Almost.
I think I missed a few, because one summer I had an NSF undergraduate fellowship at UC Irvine, and you know, was there for that summer. Mm-hmm. So there were a few summers that I missed, but not very many. Yeah.
And at what point, what year was it that you and Howard
got married in New Jersey, where we lived? Yeah. What happened was, when we met, you know, I was in high school. He was a first-year graduate student. That's a very big gap of anything. And we were friends for about 9 years before we got together. And we got married in 1976, which is a long time ago now.
Yeah, but then as a married couple but researchers, you continue to come together come to the research station.
Each working on our own projects. That's right. Yeah, so once I did my PhD work at the research station, and once that was done, I continued to return with my own graduate students, bringing my own graduate students out.
What was that like?
It was just sort of a normal progression to me. And by the way, one of my students was Barbara Ellis Quinn, who's a resident here now in Portal also. And she met her husband, Ron, here because I was bringing her here to do research with me, and then she did her own PhD research here also. Yeah. You know, it was just a normal progression from sort of high school student to undergraduate to graduate student to postdoc to senior scientist. You just put one foot in front of the other, and onward you go.
Was there anything different about the research station at that point, or was it carrying on that same tradition?
The research station still feels very much the same. It has changed in that it can now handle more people. You know, there's a dormitory. They are able to feed more people. I mean, they can handle more people at one time, more comfortably than they could before. But it still has the same feeling.
An undergrad could come here and virtually have the same experience you did
Yeah.
in 1964, where the world could be open, they're going to be with...
It happens all the time. I meet people who've been volunteers at the station all the time, and I haven't necessarily known all of them over the years because there's been a lot of them. And all the time you hear stories about how that experience changed their lives. So,
yeah. What's some of the longest running research projects out of the station?
well, Jerry Brown with the Mexican Jays probably worked there, I don't know, 30 or 40 years. And these Mexican jays are very interesting because they have helpers at the nest. Not all the adult Mexican jays breed. Some of them are helpers at the nest. And this is an example of kin selection because they're helping their kin. They're helping their aunt or their sister or their brother. So they're still related. You know, they're still helping to pass on their own genes. And it's called kin selection. And that's how Bonnie Bowen and Rolf Koford got to Portal. They started out working as postdocs with Jerry Brown in 1980, from 1983 to 1985, I think. Yeah. Well, Wade, Wade Sherbrooke, he was director for about 20 years, I think, and his research with horn lizards is very well known, and he continues that in retirement. Well, he's looked at just about any aspect of horn lizard behavior and ecology that you could possibly think of. One of the studies had to do with blood squirting from the eye, and right, it's an anti-predatory device. And what some species of horned lizards will do is they will, if picked up by a canid, in other words, a dog, a fox, a coyote, they will squirt blood from their eyes. The blood builds up in sinuses around their eyes, and they're able to rupture those blood vessels, and a stream of blood squirts out. And it usually happens when the horned lizard is already in the mouth of this coyote or fox, and they don't like it. They'll shake their heads and drop the lizard. So it's kind of a last-ditch effort. If you pick up a horned lizard, even one of the species that does the blood squirting, chances are it's not going to squirt blood at you. Yeah. Okay, every great once in a while. Yeah. So Wade Sherbrooke and George Mittendorf did that work with the blood squirting. Yeah, and George Mittendorf was another student that I brought to the research station, and he has had 40 years of research, and he still returns. In 2014, I celebrated my 50th year since I had been a volunteer at the research station by going up to the station and being a volunteer. So I had planned to spend a week, and I went up, and I was doing it all. I was washing the dishes and scrubbing the floors and doing whatever volunteers had to do. The only difference was for my scientific portion, I was interacting like with a herpetology class that was there, and, that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's more of a teaching role.
Yeah, and more of a teaching role. But my stay was cut short because Hurricane Odile hit this area, and the station was actually isolated for more than 24 hours, totally isolated, and without electricity or telephone. The edge of a Baja hurricane called Hurricane Odile hit this area in September of 2014. And we got, it depends where you were, but up to half a foot of rain, 6 inches of rain in 24, 36 hours. And the drainage here really couldn't handle that, in part because of the Horseshoe 2 fire that we'd had in 2011. And Portal flooded, some houses in Portal flooded, No buildings at the research station flooded, but because of the main fork of Cave Creek and North Fork of Cave Creek and below South Fork raging across and down the canyon, nobody from the research station was going anywhere. And we had a class there from Great Britain, a herpetology class, so there were students there, and the staff, some staff members were there, a few were there, and they weathered it very nicely. There was this great cook there at the time who said, well, I've been a camp cook, I can cook outside if I have to, and she didn't miss a beat. And water was gotten from the swimming pool.
How long were you guys isolated?
It wasn't all that long. It was,
Days?
no, it was maybe 36 hours. You know, there was a little concern because there was one sick student there who was getting sicker, and she was the first person that was taken out once it was possible to get out. And basically what happened is that the creek subsided, and eventually, you know, you could drive out. And they did evacuate the whole station at that point, except for critical staff, because it's hard to function with no electricity and no running water. In 1978, we bought this property here in Portal, and it was, yeah. So we bought the original part of the house on 4 acres, and we added this on around 2000, shortly before we were going to retire. So by 1978, we had this property. It was even before we owned a house in the east where we were working. And Howard said, who buys a second home before they buy a first home? Exactly. It was us, and it was a very good thing to do. And, you know, in 1978 we paid $62,000 for this property, which seemed like a lot of money then, but not compared to today.
Did you buy it thinking then, early on, this is where we're going to retire to?
That was certainly my thought. You know,
that is amazing.
my heart and my soul was already here, and I thought, you know, we'll buy this and then someday we'll retire here. So that's what we did, and so that means 1978 to 2019, you know, we've had this property over 40 years at this point. And of course, we were still very much in New York, the New York, New Jersey area, working there, but always coming out here for part of the year. I don't think we ever missed coming out here for part of the year, or the full year if we were on sabbatical. So in 2002, we both retired. Our daughter graduated from high school in New Jersey, and we said, that's it. And this had been the plan, you know, and out we came. So we've been here full time now, quite a long time since.
So did you start running your
the trips?
Trips.
Yeah.
Trips?
So Howard and I lecture on natural history trips around the world, and we started because in the 1980s, the American Museum of Natural History introduced a travel program. And our first trip was in 1988 to Indonesia. And the American Museum of Natural History was very excited about starting this program, and they put so many scientists on from the AMNH that I'm sure they didn't make a bit of money on that trip. They just had too many people. And that's all been scaled back, so on any trip, usually there's one study leader. In our case, we go together, so there are 2. So at that time, the AMNH only put their own staff on, and both Howard and I were on the AMNH staff. And they no longer have that travel program, unfortunately. Yeah, and so we branched out, and we do trips now for the Smithsonian, for Naturalist Journeys that's here in Portal. We've done trips for many different groups. You know,
and you've done them all over the world.
We've done them all over the world.
Is there some favorite
Well, everybody asks us that. Everybody wants to know, where should we go? What's your favorite place? It's like comparing strawberries and cherries and raspberries and, all your favorite fruits. But we have a handful of favorites. We really do.
What are some of those?
Well, Galapagos. As biologists going to the Galapagos and traveling in Darwin's footsteps, it's very exciting. And we never get tired of going to the Galapagos. Usually, each time we go, we're plotting how to get back the next time, or wondering when we'll get back the next time. So that's a favorite. Patagonia, southern Chile and Argentina, is just so stunningly beautiful that it's another place that every time I go, I'm wondering, okay, how am I getting back here? Africa, East Africa, Southern Africa, going on game safaris, with this incredible richness of wildlife, this megafauna that we no longer have in North America, and just seeing that is just mind expanding, mind boggling. We enjoy that very, very much. And the Costa Rica, we like the tropics a lot. Costa Rica, Panama, the Amazon basin. It's all, the biology in those areas is just so rich. So we like to go to wild places. We're very bad about getting to Europe. We probably do 4 or 5 trips a year, and any given trip would be 10 days, 2 weeks. Some are 3 weeks. Usually, the farther you go, the longer the trip is, which makes sense.
So once you retired, you're still connected. You were still doing things with the research station here.
Yeah, every year there is a summer field herpetology class at the station, and I help to teach that. Oh. And I'm sort of their local resource person, Yeah. And it's team taught by a whole group of biologists. They're usually 5 or 6 of us, and that's a lot of fun too, because you're interacting with colleagues.
That's what I thought.
And then you're showing very enthusiastic students. Herpetology students are very enthusiastic. They're not quite birders, but they're very enthusiastic students.
Now say more about it, because I can tell because I don't know what you mean yet.
Well,
They're not birders.
Yeah, a lot of birders. Actually, the herpers are very similar. They're very reluctant to come in from the field. They'll stay out there forever. Yeah. Birders, of course, often keep life lists of birds. Mostly herpers don't. Yeah.
But they have the same passion.
But they have the same passion. That's right. Yeah. They have the same passion, and they just want to be out there. They want to see all this stuff. They're very excited when they see it, and they're happy to have somebody to show it to them. Yeah. Yeah. So that's a very fun course. It's a combination of field work and some lab work and lectures. Mm-hmm.
But I also know that you're part of the hiking club. Can you just say more about, how that's part of what you do when you're here and part of being in the community?
Yeah, well, there are several things that I do in the community here, and hiking is certainly a very important part of that. There's been a hiking group here for forever. I mean, even before the current version of the hiking group, Mary Winkler, Jean Williams, Alden Hayes. First it was a women's group, and then they let Alden in. And and so then it kind of expanded from there to being co-ed. And that kind of died off a little bit and then started up again. And actually, Jean Williams was very instrumental in starting it up again. So the hiking group meets every Thursday, and It has a presence on the Portal website, portalrodeo.com. You can also always tell what's up, what's happening next, what happened last. And we hike. I mean, we go all over, mostly in the Chiricahuas, the Palencios, but we travel. On occasion, we will go, like we've done some Grand Canyon trips, a portion of the hiking group, hiking to the bottom of the Grand Canyon. We did rim to rim, south rim, down one trail and up a different trail. We've done that a bunch of times. And there are various subsets of the hiking group. Like there are some avid backpackers now. I'm not one of those at this point, the backpackers and another group, like a group maybe that rented a house up in Payson, will meet up, and hike parts of trails together. And so we do a lot of fun things.
How many years have you been in the hiking group?
Well, certainly since I've been here full time since 2002, but even then, when I was here doing research, if I could possibly get away on a Thursday, I did.
Yeah.
And so I can't exactly answer that question, but
yeah.
A long time.
You're probably one of the old timers.
I am definitely one of the old timers. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
You said, Carol, there's a couple things that you're connected with in the community.
Yeah.
Tell us about what's another one.
Well, I'm very involved in So What, and Barbara Ellis Quinn and I bring the Friday night forums to Portal, and I think that's a really important part of the community, an important role for us. Yeah, once or twice a month on a Friday night, we have a speaker, and often the speaker's from Portal because we have lots of speakers here, but we also bring in people from other parts of the country, other parts of the world, and they give an hour presentation, and then afterwards there are questions and cookies. And they're pretty well attended. I mean, the last Friday night forum had 50 people, I think. Yeah, we always, with the cookies, there is a scholarship jar where people can contribute to So What scholarships. And we have 21 applicants this year, so we're looking for money.
How do you find the speakers besides the ones that you know through your own contact?
Well, I try to do everything that I do democratically. And what I do every spring is we circulate a list among So What members, but I also send it out to the community asking for suggestions. And we get lots of different suggestions and take that list and see what we can do with it. And so it is not hard to get speakers for this area, just because we have so many ourselves. Yeah. But we get, as I said, we get outside speakers too. So it works fine. Yeah. And we put that program together. We put these forums together in June, July, and by August it's published for the season. We sort of have an academic year calendar with So What. We start up again September and end in May. And that's what we do with forums also. Forums are more October to May.
Describing or talking a little bit about how the research station is part of the community or different, or how the community and the research station interact with each other over time that you've seen.
Yeah, there certainly was tension more between the research station community itself and the ranching community. People coming from very different backgrounds, unsure about what to think of each other. I think that over time that has diminished, and that the two groups are not as far apart from each other as they were. I think the Malpai group has helped that to some degree, where you have ranchers and conservationists all in the same organization, realizing that there are things that you have in common that you need to work towards together.
What were some of those original tensions about between researchers and ranchers?
I think it wasn't even clear.
Oh, interesting.
I think it was, I'm not even sure that either side could fully articulate what some of those tensions were. Again, I think it was just really different backgrounds and different educational levels at that time. And, today, most ranchers have college degrees. And so it gives everybody more in common. I mean, the research station it is off on its own to some degree. Researchers come from around the U.S., around the world, with a specific project and a limited amount of time to do that project. And so they are really focused on that. They don't really interact that much with the community. It's people who've come back year after year and sort of eke their way into the community, or what's happened over the years too is that tons of people who worked at the research station have bought land and retired to the Portal area. So that too changes a bit what the community's like. And if you have two neighbors, I don't want to pick on ranchers, but say a non-scientist neighbor and scientist neighbor, and you get to know each other and you find things in common, any tensions that might have been there are eased. Well, going back for a minute to one other thing I do in the community is I run the book group. We have a book group that meets on the first Tuesday of every month at the Portal Library, and everybody is welcomed. And that information too is all published on the Portal website. We probably average around 9 or 10 for a single discussion, but we've had up to 15. Sometimes we're down to 3, depending on who's where and why. But it's a really nice group, and it functions well, and we have very good discussions. And yes, we read the book. It's one of the few organizations in Portal that doesn't involve food. You go to everything and you have to bring food, right? Well, for the book group, we don't bring food. We just come and discuss the book. But once a year, we have a potluck and movie night, and we'll watch a movie related to one of our books, and we do eat food. Yeah. So I think that's the summary. The Portal has been my whole life, from age 17 on. In the years when I was going back and forth between the New York, New Jersey area, and we worked in Manhattan, we lived in northern New Jersey on a lake in a forest, which kept me sane, basically. I would get questions always, well, isn't it a culture shock when you leave New York and you go out to Arizona? And I would say, it is definitely a culture shock. The culture shock is when I go to New York. It used to always take me a little while to kind of ease back into that kind of life. And that's exactly right. I enjoyed working in New York. It's a wonderful place. Lots to do, lots to see, exciting times there. But I for all those years, I was a visitor there. Yeah.